So today's session is about how to connect to a data fabric, and Dan is going to be taking us through that entire experience today with a good demo. I encourage all of you to ask questions as you go along. Don't be afraid to interrupt, but Dan will also make sure that he pauses and allows for questions to happen. You can also ask questions right in the chat, and I'll just make sure that I read those out to Dan so he's aware of those. So I'm going to send that over to you, Dan, if you'd like to get going on today's presentation.
Sure. Go ahead and share my screen.
Thank you.
Hopefully you can see it okay.
I can see it great.
All right, cool. So let's jump in. So this is episode 9. The other 8 episodes are available at cinchy.tv or alternatively just through our website, cinchy.com. So we're not going to be recovering these concepts, of course, but there's some good foundational concepts there that we'll be kind of building on top of today. So if you haven't already checked these out, I'd encourage you to do that. And today we're going to be covering data synchronization. So now that we know what a data fabric is and what the value proposition is and concepts like active metadata and autonomous data, how do I connect data from my existing systems, on-prem, cloud, etc., both in and out of the data fabric, knowing that that fabric is that interwoven view of data that is a blend of existing data that exists inside of existing systems. So that's what we're going to cover today. And just to remind on the overall architecture of the fabric, there are different layers here. Today, we're going to be focused on the legacy integration services, and more specifically, the bidirectional synchronization capability with the built-in connectors. In future conversations, we'll talk about real-time data streaming and the universal REST API. And in next week's episode, we're actually going to be introducing how you go about building application experiences using the experience framework that sit on top of the fabric to basically app enable the data. But again, today we're going to focus on the bidirectional synchronization in the overall architecture of the fabric. So just to remind, when we say data fabric, what does that actually mean? So picture literally a fabric. Take any, I don't know, a t-shirt or a sweater, and you have threads that are interwoven, and there's someone who built that fabric that is weaving the threads in and out of each other, and what you see on the surface is the one that rises to the surface. So when you picture a data set, kind of reframe your mind and envision the data set as a fabric where you have attributes and you have records. And at the intersection is a column, but depending on which thread is risen to the surface based on whoever wove the fabric, that thread could have a different origin. So for example, the reds could be data coming from Salesforce. The dark green could be coming from Dynamics. The lighter green could be coming from Workday. The pink could be coming from Outlook. The orange from another system. You get the idea. Now, these are existing systems. They could be on-prem, they could be cloud, they could be custom built. You could pull directly from a database. But what Cinchy is also doing is enabling the purple, which is data that is autonomous. It is born inside of the fabric natively. So it's copyless, it's schema independent. And we're not going to cover that today, but just keep in mind that your fabric is the blend of all of this together to create that connected view. So we're going to show how this actually works, and we're going to take an existing connector that we have configured, and we're going to make a simple change to that just so you see kind of what that looks like and talk through how that works. So let me pop out of the deck and go into the demo, but I'll also just pause if there's any questions or anything very specific that people want to get out of the conversation before I jump in. No questions? Okay. All right, so I'm in an environment, and I'm going to, first of all, we're going to just demo an existing, what does that say? An existing synchronization, show you how one is actually working, and then we'll make a change to it. So first of all, we're going to use Salesforce just as the example. So I'm logged into Salesforce, and I'm going to just add a dummy record here. So I'm going to say the first name is F name, the last name is L name, and the account is ABC Inc. And the email address, I'm just going to say it's fname@lname.com. And the title, I'll just put ABC. So I'm adding a record, obviously a fake record, into a sandbox Salesforce environment. So that record is now added, and we've already connected that particular environment to our fabric. So if I wanted to locate the corresponding object, I'm going to search the fabric for people. And I can locate people on the fabric. There it is. You can see how it's all connected. And I can open up that data set. And what I'll see is a fabric view where there's, again, different threads that are woven together from different sources. So the first horizontal thread that you see is the one that I just added inside of Salesforce. So there's fname, lname at ABC with the title ABC. That works at ABC Inc. And that particular record came from Salesforce. But then I have two autonomous records. One came from another system, another autonomous, another came from Salesforce. And you can see for the most part, this is all just kind of test data here, Bart Simpson, fname, etc. So I have that view, but how did that actually work? And also, if I go back into Salesforce and make a change to that, if I change fname to fname2 and the title to ABCD, and say save, if I go back into the fabric and just refresh this particular record, you'll see that that change is reflected in the fabric. So here we have a real-time link in. And if I look at the history of this record through the collaboration log, I can see that it's tracking the changes. So I can see that it was added in Salesforce, then something else happened, but then Salesforce made another change and it's tracking that change where I added the two. And I also changed the title from ABC to ABCD. So it's tracking that automatically. But how is this actually working? How is it actually connected? So let's actually go under the covers and see what's actually happening here. So I'm going to go back to the fabric and I'm going to search for synchronization. And I'm going to locate a data set called data sync configurations. So I have builder access. So I can see this is where this particular data set exists in the fabric. And it's actually under the Cinchy domain. So what that means is these are all the Cinchy objects. This is the Cinchy meta model. So that's where you're going to find things like users and queries and groups. And all of these could be, of course, separately synced to different sources. Like maybe I want to sync with Active Directory or implement single sign-on. All the tables are here, user-defined functions are here, data experiences are here, but the one that we're going to focus on is this one here, data sync configurations. And you can see kind of how that's connected into the broader ecosystem. But let me go ahead and open that up. And what I'm seeing is the exhaustive list that we've configured in this particular environment. But we're going to just focus on the Salesforce one as an example. And you can see we have 4 configurations that we've added. For different objects. We got people, we got accounts. We also have an example of a batch one and a real-time one. So we're going to focus on the inbound Salesforce people one that takes people and maps it to contacts inside of Salesforce. And I'm going to open that up in a form style experience just to make it a bit easier to manage. And what I'm now seeing is the XML representation of the configuration for this particular link. So it's basically the mapping between the people table inside of Cinchy and the contacts object that exists inside of Salesforce. So what you're seeing here is a couple things. There's a source and a destination. So in this case, the source is a Salesforce push topic. And of course, all of this is documented on our online documentation around the different specifications. And you will also see in future versions a nice rich GUI for being able to manage this. But it's a simple XML document. So I have the source and then the destination. So the destination, Cinchy target table, because you can have different destinations, you can have different sources. I'll show you some other examples in a minute. But you can see I'm mapping it to the domain called contacts and the table called people. So if I go back into Cinchy and let's go back home and let's go into the people table. So the domain is contacts and the table is people. So I'm pointing it to that particular table. And then if I expand that, then I have a couple of things here. One is I'm defining how to treat new records. that are added in Salesforce, and I want to insert it. So I could ignore it. I could have different behaviors, but in this case, I wanted to propagate the insertion. For change, I want to update it. I could have it disregard updates, but in this case, I want to change. And for deletes, I can have them cascade, or I can have them actually do an update. Maybe I want to update a timestamp that says when it was removed from the source, but I don't want to delete it from Cinchy. In this case, I actually want to delete it, but of course, inside of Cinchy, it will be just simply available in the recycle bin. Even if it's not recoverable in Salesforce, it's now suddenly recoverable. So that's changing the behaviors of kind of at that record level. And then I'm configuring how do I want to synchronize it. Now, in this particular case, it's a very simple configuration based on a single ID. In other examples, though, you're going to have more complex resolution where it may be the combination of different fields or even some type of entity resolution logic. But in this case, we're going to keep it simple for today and just have it be a single field mapping to a single field, as simple as it can possibly get. I can also optionally add filters to the target. So maybe I only wanted to override or basically have the ability to influence a subset of the data in the target. And then most importantly, I'm doing my column mappings. Where I'm essentially taking my target columns. So you can see I'm taking this field called Salesforce USA ID, and then another one called company, and then I'm mapping it to the fields that are in the source column, and that source column is defined here. So now I'm looking at the source definition, where essentially creating the schema of interest for purposes of mapping. So it's only monitoring polling changes for data that I care about as the builder. So I've identified a number of fields that I want it to monitor for change, and then I'm mapping that. So you can see here's a field called account ID. Its data type is text, and count ID is mapped to the field called company. But company in Cinchy is a link, so we're going to resolve it based on the corresponding company ID. Whereas other ones are simple text, there's no need to do any entity resolution, and it's really as simple as that. But let's actually make a change to this. So again, I'll pause if there's any questions, but what I'm now going to do is actually change this and change the data model. Anyone have any questions? Okay. So let's go into the people table, and I'm going to design the table as a builder, and I'm going to go to columns, and you can see here's the current definition of that, where we got things like company and name, and I'm going to go to the bottom, and I'm just going to add a new column, and I'm just going to call this department demo field, just a new field. I'm going to keep it as a text. I'm going to classify it as internal. I'm going to not bother with any rules or logic. I'm going to keep this really, really simple. So this new field is going to be text, and I'm just going to go ahead and save that. So I've essentially changed the semantic model that exists inside the fabric, and I've added one new attribute, simple plain old text field. And by default, users won't have access to view or change this particular data. But I've already given access to the service accounts. I'll show you what access has been granted. So the connector runs under a service account. So service accounts have already been granted the ability to not only view data, but even change data. So they have the ability to edit. And I can control that down to individual cells, specific rows, specific columns. But for the purpose of simplifying the demo, I've just gave it the ability to edit all the columns in the data. And I've given users the ability to view the data, so everyone in Cinchy can see it, but I haven't given them the ability to edit anything other than very specific columns. So if I go to manage data, now I'm basically in a user view of that. I'm no longer in the builder view. And I can see if I scroll to the right, there's going to be a new column called department demo field. And I can reorder this. So let me just edit this view. And you can see all the different columns. I can remove them. I can add new ones. I can add new views that are personalized or shared. And there's the new field if I want to add a new one, but I'm just going to go ahead and actually just move that to the top. I'll put it right after the company. So there's my new field called department demo field. I'm going to save this view. And now you're seeing this particular data set, including the one that I had added, fname to lname, and then there's the field, but I don't have edit access, I only have read-only access to it. And right now there's no values in it because we haven't done anything with it, we haven't mapped it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually map it from the source to the destination, make a change, and show how that pushes its way kind of into the fabric.
Just a couple of questions here, Dan.
Yep,
Just
absolutely.
before you get too far, you may have to repeat what you were just about to build there as well. But
Okay,
I
yeah.
have a question here that says, do records always persist in Cinchy?
They
The change
do.
record.
Now, the change record is persisting. It's tracking the version history and whatnot. So this is not virtualization for sure. Although I could actually have a source being a virtualization source. But the fabric is persisting the data because I'm only bringing in data that is of interest for an operational use case. So don't forget, you're not just dumping data in here. You're basically app enabling that data to run your business. And by bringing it in, what that enables is the normalization of controls. So it's now going to be version control, it's going to be access control down to a data cell level. And as you start to use that in various operational use cases, including connecting that to other data, you're going to get characteristics of performance that will mimic as if it were all in a single data store. So the blended view of this may be coming from 50 different sources, but I can now build a query. That query is an API, and I can expose that and get thousands of transactions a second that are fully atomic, fully ACID properties, but at the same time benefiting from plasticity. So the platform is really calibrated and specializes in the kind of operational use cases, hence the caching of that data, the copying of that data.
Okay, great.
Yep.
There's another question here that says, what if the company added in Salesforce is not on the company's table?
So if the company in Salesforce, so separately, so it's a good question, we're syncing the companies into the company's table. So in Salesforce, they're called accounts, and we map that into the company. So we have a separate config that matches that entity. So I'll show you what that looks like quickly, just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. If I go back and look at Salesforce, you can see there's the people one that I had added, but here's the accounts one. So the accounts one is basically the company level synchronization. So here you're seeing some of the fields that are being added. It's very simple because everything you're seeing how we've configured Salesforce is just purely for demo, but it's syncing the companies first. So one of the things you need to be aware of as a builder, the end users don't need to worry about this, of course, but the builders who are doing this is you need to just essentially sequence the way that you're connecting the data in based on the relationships of the entities. Now, what we're doing here is company syncs first, and then the account syncs. The company syncs first, and then the people sync, such that it can auto-resolve without needing to dynamically insert it. Let's say these were coming from different sources, or let's say you couldn't control that orchestration, you can actually sync them independently from each other and then separately do the resolution and linking as an after the fact thing. So maybe your company's data is only coming in once a day for some reason, but your people data is coming in intraday, and you may get people from new companies that were added in the system of record, but you don't have a copy of that yet. So you can essentially have it be staged where it's not linked, and then it can be linked later after the fact. Good question, no?
Great. That's all the questions for now.
Okay, great. So what I was doing is, if you remember, I added a new field called, what did I call it? Department demo field. And I'm now going to map that to my data set. So if I go back into Salesforce, there's a field called department. So let's say I want to bring that field in, because remember, it's only pulling the data that I'm calling for. So if I go back into the Salesforce people record, and let me just close that out so I don't edit the wrong one. So first of all, the department is already in the source definition. So if it wasn't in the source definition, I just need to register it as a field of interest, but I've already done that. Not only that, I'm also just demonstrating a simple transformation here. So the department field from Salesforce, I'm just doing a simple string replacement where you can use regular expressions. So a simple transformation. I'm just going to replace all the A's with E's, specifically uppercase ones. So I'm just going to keep that really simple just to demonstrate that you can do inline dynamic transformations, and you don't have to do it during the synchronization. You can do it after the fact as well. So I can have calculated columns inside of Cinchy, but let's do it inline such that it's automatic. Not only that, I can also create calculated columns, virtual columns essentially, in the source definition that I can then map. So here I've created one called new field, And what it does is it concatenates the department field, which is this one here, which in turn is the manipulated version of department, replacing the A's with the E's. Then I'm adding a space, and then I'm adding a title. So simple manipulation there. So when I map it, I can map it with new field or department. Let's start with just department. So I'm just going to copy that into the clipboard, and I'm going to go down to the actual target, and I'm going to add a new mapping. So let's grab the, I'm just going to copy one, let's say birthday, and we're going to take department, and we're going to map that, and it's going to be the source column is department, and the destination column, if you remember, it was department demo field. So department demo field, and I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now if I go back into Salesforce and edit this particular record, and for the department, I'll just type in A, B, C, D, E. And don't forget, we're replacing, I think, the A's with the E's. So I'm going to save that, so that change takes effect. I'm going to go back into this particular table, people, where there's the new field, and I'm just going to refresh it. And if it worked, and it did, I can see there's the new field that is populated. And notice it says E, B, C, D, E instead of A, B, C, D, E, because I've done that manipulation. Now, what I can also do is change that mapping. So let's say I want to not take department, I want to take this new field, which is the concatenation of the now manipulated department and the title, and I'm going to map that to the same field. So instead of that, I'm going to take new field, and I'm going to map that. So let's go ahead and obsessively format, save it. If I come back into here, and if I now change this, so if I do A, B, C, D, E, let's say F, I've saved that. And if I go back into people and refresh it, it should give me the concatenation of, what did I take? I forget what it actually said. It was the department and the title. That's what it was. And again, the department is the manipulated version of that with a space in between. So here's the title, ABCD, and the department is ABCDEF. If I go back into the people, you can see it's concatenated the two as I've instructed it to. So EBCDEF space ABCD. And don't forget that because the data is on the fabric, not only is it tracking and synchronizing the data, where I can literally shut down Salesforce and I can still interact with that data. I can API enable that data. I can do all these. I can make that data available for even edit for users, and then I can reverse the sync such that it updates Salesforce as well, and they don't need to log into Salesforce to be able to do that. And that could be user managed data, it could be AI, it could be anything. But behind the scenes, it's also tracking all changes. So you can see, if you remember, I added the record in Salesforce, and then I changed the first name and last name from fname to fname2, and then I changed some other fields. And you're seeing basically there's Salesforce making the change, and if I scroll to the very right, you'll see what it's actually changing. It's the changing of the department demo field. So I populated it with this, and then I changed it from this to this. So what I was changing, of course, is the mapping logic behind that. But the end resulting data is ultimately what is being persisted, because that's what you need to maintain that integrity on. So you're seeing essentially the trail, and I can roll it back, and we've designed this flow. If you remember, we do a push back of the, so if I delete this record, this fname2, delete that, so it's now out of Salesforce, it's gone, probably can't even recover it. But if I go back into Cinchy and refresh, you'll see that it is actually deleted. It's gone. Where did it go? Well, it's simply in the recycle bin. So I can see that it was deleted in Salesforce November the 5th at 11:56 a.m. And if I needed to restore that, simply right-click, restore, and we're back in business. So it's giving me this safety net on that data. And this is Salesforce. It could have really been any system, of course. We're just using that as an example. So that's the demo. Now that's just using Salesforce. There is a number of other connectors that I'll cover in a second, but really what we've done here is we've taken data from an app and we've connected it to the fabric, where that node is a blend of data from multiple sources and it now can connect to other nodes, which may be also blends from other sources, including even net new experiences that I can create, and I can now avoid point-to-point integration. So if I need 100 systems that now need to interact with that new department column, I don't need to do 100 integrations. If they're connected to the fabric, then all they simply need is access. So that access replaces the copying, and you're benefiting from plasticity, which we covered in the last episode. Here's an example of other connectors that are built into the platform. Now, you don't have to use the built-in connectors. There is the ability to use any integration technology, because the value of a data fabric isn't the ability to connect it. It makes it easier, but it's the idea of connect once and use many instead of connect every use, which is the traditional integration approach in the app-centric world. So that's the demo today. I want to make sure I leave a couple minutes for any additional questions. And if you're finding this valuable, I encourage you to join us for next week's session. And next week, we're going to be covering application experiences, which is now that I have this data on the fabric, what if I want to app enable that? I want to create mobile applications, web experiences, and I want to do that in a non-proprietary way, but have it be such that it's fully decoupled from the data. So that should be good fun. And that's it for today. So I'll pause for any questions. Got a quiet bunch today.
We do. I don't have any questions in the chat, but again, this is a great opportunity. Dan's here to answer any of your questions, so feel free to ask. If there's a connector that you don't see that you're also interested, it's a good opportunity to just talk about that as well.
Yep. Alternatively, if there's no questions, does anyone have any thoughts or comments on what they've seen and how they would maybe contrast that to others? I'd be curious to hear what you guys are thinking. Also, just make sure that you're all alive.
Hey, Dan, could you also synchronize through a REST API?
Absolutely. So one of the connectors is REST. We also have SOAP and others, and the REST endpoint can be a source as well as a destination. So if you watched a couple episodes back, we built queries which are automatically exposed as APIs. So if I needed to sync data out, well, I can build those APIs in seconds that respect the universal access. But at the other end, if I have, 100 SaaS apps and they all expose data over REST, well, now I can use the fabric to create that interwoven view of all that and gain the intelligence off of that. And I can do all of that in a kind of ridiculously short time.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that question.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we're actually at time.
Actually, there is one from
Great.
Steve, and I know I just want to grab it quick. If you sync a column back to Salesforce that you have defined to not be available to some users, is that limit on access to the column effective in Salesforce?
It is not. So first of all, Salesforce itself, the sync will run under some credentials, so you need to make sure that it has access. But the one thing to just be aware of is when data is on the fabric, it's protected. You take data out of the fabric and it's now protected with the traditional mechanisms. So you just be aware of that. So I could, if Salesforce has the ability to access, let's say that column value for all rows, you pull it into Salesforce, and it's now no longer under the protection of universal controls. So very good question. And what that tells you also is that you don't want to do it by simply making all the data in the fabric available in legacy systems, because that's a huge vulnerability, because that's how it used to work before you had a fabric. So you want to minimize the kind of going back and forth. You're only pulling data into the fabric because you need to, and you're only pushing it back into a system because you need to. And that's the trade-off. That's the compromise that you need to think about. Very good question.
All right, with that then, if we want to close it out, I have included in the chat the link to next week's session, which I welcome you to all join. This session will be available on demand later on today, and we'll post that and send you all an email so that you can easily access that.